Well, happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome to Food for Thought. We're from Believe Big, and this is our educational foundational program on all things nutrition. My name is Stacy Fritz. I'll be your moderator today, and our rock star Paula Weinberg is here. And Paula, I'm so excited for today's conversation. I hope everybody else is as well. Today is part 2 of our carb conversation. Part 1, the good, bad, and the ugly. We stayed in one lane about carbohydrates, and today we're taking it into a different lane, which is carbohydrates as it relates to all things sugar. Hot topic, right, Paula?
Yes. Yeah. A big one.
So before you start teaching us and guiding us on today's content, I just want to give our listeners an opportunity to go ahead. I'm not saying we're going to answer them straight away, Paula, so don't worry. But what we're going to do is we're going to get them kind of thinking before you start talking. One of the great things that we can do in this forum is maybe put in the chat a question that you might have about sugar before she even starts speaking. And then perhaps as she starts unwrapping the conversation, not only will your question get answered, but you'll be able to reflect back on what you thought and then revisit it later on to now what you know. And I hope that sounds okay. So I will be watching the questions and also in the chat box. If by some chance, Paula, we run out of time, which seems to be the case because we get into the juicy topics, we will always follow it up in our summary. And the other thing is that you do not have to grab a pencil and a piece of paper. We're recording this for you. And all of the episodes are listed on the believebig.org site, our main site, and it's under the nutrition category. So don't worry, somehow, some way, we will find a way to you. And lastly, if that still doesn't work, you have direct access to me, Stacy at believebig.org. You can always call the office, but we want to make sure that you know that your questions are really important to us, and we want you to really understand and grab a hold of the content. So that said, I'm going to pass the baton to Paula, and she's going to kick us off on carbs, specifically sugar.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Stacy. It's so exciting to be back together and talking. Welcome back to those of you guys who have been with us before. I would love to know where you're sort of tuning in from, what part of the world, and if you're returning or a first timer. So you guys can chat up in the box as I'm talking, and that would be great. I'm going to share my screen here. Host disabled. I think you might have disabled my screen share by accident. So just take a look there. I can't hear you.
There we go.
Okay.
Let's try that again, Paula. You are now the co-host, and you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, here we go. Okay, I think we're back on track here. Let me just see. Okay. All right, I think we're good. So we're going to get started. Just a little recap of where we've been. So far in our journey together, we have been talking about why food matters and how to choose foods that are of high quality, that nourish our cells. Last time we began the conversation, as Stacy mentioned, about carbs. We tackled the good and the bad. Today, we're going to tackle the last half of that, the ugly. And sugar. Last time we talked about why those good carbs, complex carbs, are so important for our health, and how eating complex carbs are the good carbs to focus on. So if any of these conversations have inspired you or have given you any room to make changes in your life, put them in the chat. We'd love to hear how this information is actually being used by the listeners. And if you guys have questions, of course, ask them. But if you have any inspirations or wins to share with us, share those as well, please, too. So today we're going to talk about the ugly side of carbs, which is sugar. And why do I call it the ugly side? Am I just a cranky nutritionist that doesn't know how to have fun? Well, I've got a sweet tooth myself, and I share the struggle in limiting sugar in my diet. And so hopefully by the time I'm done today, you guys will have a new understanding of why sugar can be detrimental to our health and healing, and maybe some new tactics to use to help get rid of sugar out of the diet. in general, it's really not a good idea to demonize foods. Putting judgment on food suddenly makes it a dangerous thing to eat. It's a matter of being right or wrong, and that brings guilt and shame. And that can result in a dangerous spiral of things driving you toward the food, exactly that ones we don't want to be eating. So today's session is not about making you feel guilty or bad for enjoying sweets. It's a natural human inclination, but to educate you on how and why we get ensnared in sugar's traps and the consequences to our bodies from eating it, especially when we're healing from cancer. So it's important information to know so we can be mindful of our choices and be mindful of these things as we, move through our lives. So while abstaining from sugar alone isn't going to cure anyone's cancer, continuing to eat it can derail your progress to healing. It can also negatively impact your response to various cancer therapies, and it can contribute to a lot of other disease pathologies that you see on the screen here. So sometimes we have to prioritize turning away from old choices that keep us stuck in old patterns and turn toward new choices and new habits that invite health and creating new cells and new life within us. The first thing to know about sugar is that it's highly, highly processed. And we already know that processed foods are stripped of their nutrients, leaving behind only the starches and the sugars. In the case of sugar, it's not just a processed food, it's an ultra processed food. There's processed food like applesauce is a processed apple. And then there's ultra processed food like white table sugar and fast food. So let's go back for a second to sugar's roots and better understand. Sugarcane is technically a grass and it originates in the tropics. It contains mostly water, and it is the juice of it contains a host of nutrients like potassium, magnesium, chromium, manganese, and copper, as well as some fiber and even some amino acids, which are proteins. However, within a day of being cut, the sugarcane begins to ferment and rot. And so the refining process quickly was invented in order to capitalize on that sweet nectar. Sugarcane has to be crushed. You can see how it looks almost like bamboo. It has to be crushed to yield its juice, then evaporated, bleached, and deodorized to generate white crystallized table sugar. In fact, it takes 17 feet of sugarcane to make 1 cup of white sugar. White table sugar barely resembles its origins. It contains none of the nutrients, protein, fiber, or water that were part of the sugarcane plant. And this is what I mean by an ultra-processed food. Another random fact, if you're vegan or vegetarian, you might not ever look at sugar the same way again, because sugar is also filtered through what's called bone char. And bone char comes from cattle or dog bones that are heated, powdered, and dehydrated and turned into a charcoal filter of sorts. And it helps whiten the appearance of sugar because we all like that pure sugar look, and to remove some of the impurities. So it's amazing the things that go on behind the scenes that we don't know about with our food. Where do we find sugar? The better question is probably, where don't we find sugar? It's everywhere, and it's in so many products. And if you've ever tried to cut back on sugar by starting to read food labels, you quickly recognize that sugar's really permeated everything. And it's sometimes even hard to recognize sugar in a product because guess what? There are upwards of 70 different names for sugar that you might find on a food label. I've heard others mention as many 200 names. So some are really obvious, like confectioner's glaze or, coconut sugar, but some are really tricky, like maltodextrin or sucanat or isoglucose. One trick is to look for words that sound like sugar, which is dextrose or sucrose, and they end in OSE, but some of them are just hard to recognize, and you simply need to just be aware and kind of read the list. But breakfast foods are such a big trap for added sugars. We're going to take a look at one marketed breakfast food. It's called Special K. It's made by Kellogg's. It's a pastry crisp. And Special K back in the day when I was a kid was a brand that went out of its way to appeal to a healthy breakfast crowd. I don't know if it still does that, but let's take a look what Special K is putting out these days. So this list of ingredients here, I have to move my camera set around in order. Oh, actually, I can't do that. Hopefully you guys aren't being blocked by our screen, our videos of the list of ingredients. Hopefully you can move that around yourself so that you can see the list of ingredients there. But we're going to take a look at how sugar shows up in the pastry crisps. So it shows up here. They've actually bolded it on the label, which is unusual. They don't usually make it that easy for us, but we have sugar, vegetable glycerin, which is a sweet syrup made from soybean, coconut, or palm oil. We have maltodextrin, fructose, dextrose, and invert sugar. So that's 5 different kinds of sugar plus a sweet syrup, plus highly processed vegetable oils, another toxic ingredient that we'll talk about in depth another day. Plus we've got some bleached white flour and really no ingredients here that offer us any nutrients. The only nutrients that have been in this product are added back synthetically to the enriched flour, which is required by law in order for this to qualify as a food. So these are the quintessential example of empty calories that cost your body vital nutrients to process. They spike your blood sugars, leave you craving more sugar and more food because your cells are actually still starving for actual real nutrients. And your brain's pleasure centers are lit up like a billboard in Times Square. So let's zero in for a second before we leave this slide on the labels, the part of the label that reads total carbohydrates, and under that it has fiber and sugar. So there's a separate line item for total sugars and a separate line item for added sugars. And that's important to understand as you're looking at labels. 1 teaspoon of sugar is 4 grams, just for frame of reference. It gives people a better visual because we don't really know what 7, 8, 10, 14 grams of sugar really means. Unless we put it into teaspoon form, at least for myself. So here we're getting 7 grams of added sugars. And that means that all the sugar that's in this product has been added through the process. There's no naturally occurring sugars. So the total sugars and the added sugars reflect those 2 distinctions. Sorry. The recommendation for added sugar consumption is given by several different entities, and we all are aware of the World Health Organization these days from our COVID experience. So the World Health Organization recommends that no more than 10% of calories of our daily diet come from added sugars. And what is 10% of calories? Based on a 2,000 calorie diet, it's 200 calories or 12 teaspoons or 50 grams of added sugars. Now, the American Heart Association, they recommend no more than 5% of total calories be from added sugars. And that pretty much equals out to 6 teaspoons for women or 9 teaspoons for men. But honestly, I find these recommendations really hard to follow. Like, I don't know exactly how many calories per day I eat, and I don't track that kind of thing. So I wouldn't really know how to put that into action in terms of exactly how many added sugars am I allowed. So the takeaway from this, and what I want to let you guys know, if you're experiencing cancer and trying to heal from cancer, or you've recently had cancer, your added sugar total, and to make it really simple, should be 0. Because added sugar should not be something that you're consuming if you're having a cancer journey. Remember, added sugars have been added either by you at home or by the manufacturer of the product. And that means it's a pretty processed food, and this is not something we're looking to consume. It's not going to add to our health, right? So added sugar should not be part of your diet. That's not to say that you're not going to have naturally occurring sugars in the foods that you eat from those good complex carbs, but added sugar should be 0. So that should make it a little simpler, but these are the general guidelines. To put it in perspective, in the year 1830, less than 200 years ago, the average sugar consumption is estimated just at a couple pounds of sugar per person per year. And that only source of sugar back then was natural honey. By the year 2000, the sugar consumption was upwards of 120 pounds of sugar per person per year. And today it's estimated somewhere in the range of 150 pounds to 180 pounds of sugar per person per year that we're consuming. So you can see the visual on the graph without getting too tangled up in the numbers, the explosion of the use of sugar in our lives. And I couldn't find a more accurate statistic of like this current day, what the exact usage is. But I think COVID has distracted health statisticians from such jobs. But the bottom line is there's some staggering statistics around the amount of sugar that we're actually eating. And part of the staggering statistics, I think, is to blame because of the invention of high fructose corn syrup. And that occurred in the late 1950s. High fructose corn syrup is the industrial creation of two scientists who successfully used chemistry to rearrange the composition of the glucose in corn syrup, turning some of it into fructose. And the novel compound of glucose and fructose was really sweet, much sweeter than sugar and cheaper to make than cane sugar, which you heard the process is pretty involved to try to get sugar from that sugar cane. So that combination of cheap and sweet made it skyrocket in popularity. And by the time I was a kid in the 1970s, high fructose corn syrup was everywhere. It replaced sugar in soda, and it spread to all the processed foods, from breads to ketchup to cereal. So I want to explain a little bit more about why high fructose corn syrup is different and why it makes it even more worrisome than white table sugar. So you can see here, without getting too tangled up in this science of it, that high fructose corn syrup is processed differently in our bodies than regular sugar. Fructose is a simple sugar molecule, and it doesn't require digestion because it's already a simple sugar. Instead, it gets absorbed quickly by our gut and then shunted straight to the liver, where it triggers the production of triglycerides and cholesterol. And so if you've ever been told you have high triglycerides or high cholesterol, this is definitely probably a role in that, unless, of course, you have a genetic predisposition to that, but that's another topic. So having the fructose come in and generate the blood lipids in the liver can also lead to fatty liver. But the remaining glucose in the high fructose corn syrup triggers those high blood sugars and the insulin spikes. So the high fructose corn syrup isn't recognized by our brain as food that contains calories, which is really interesting. But high fructose corn syrup does cost us nutrients and energy to metabolize it, which results in a twisted series of messages to our body. And it ends up igniting our hunger signals and cravings, and it leads to, more seeking of that same sugar and weight gain. If that wasn't enough, high fructose corn syrup is made from GMO corn, and it's been treated with pesticides, and it also contains toxins such as mercury from the actual manufacture of the corn into the high fructose corn syrup. And the government subsidizes corn production right now to the tune of $500 billion per year. So unfortunately, high fructose corn syrup isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And this brings us squarely to the next topic, which is addiction, and how and why we get ensnared in sugar's grips. So sugar is really highly addictive. It lights up the same parts of our brain that are stimulated by cocaine and other addictive substances. And the intake of sugar releases these opioids and dopamine in our brain, leading to neurochemical changes that resemble the effects of substance abuse. It has the potential to override our self-control mechanism. So I don't know if you've ever had that experience of eating something, and as you were eating it, knowing that you couldn't really stop eating it. I had this experience lately that I want to share this quick story with you. So I came across these dark chocolate covered goji berries, and dark chocolate is one of my my weaknesses. I love it a lot. So I found these dark chocolate covered goji berries, thought these will be great. They're healthy, they're dark chocolate. What could go wrong? Well, I didn't read closely at the label, and the label contains, straight up real white sugar in the processing of that dark chocolate. They were glazed, kind of like a raisinette looking thing. Picture that. So as I was eating it, I realized I couldn't stop eating these things. And so I ended up eating the whole pack of goji berries. And it was 5 servings. It was not meant to be eaten in a single sitting. So I ended up consuming about 85 grams of sugar in about 5 to 10 minutes. And that's a shocking amount of sugar to consume and to think about consuming. But you want to know what else? The only reason I stopped was because they ran out. I wasn't the least bit full. And I wouldn't have stopped, honestly. If there was more in the pack, I would have kept eating because I knew in that moment I couldn't stop eating them. It had lit up my brain in a way where I was in a spell. And so at least they were chocolate covered goji berries, and I got 20 grams of fiber. But guess what? In that short amount of time it took me to gobble those things down, my brain and body didn't even have time to recognize that fiber or that fullness. I just could have kept eating for a long time. So that was interesting. Some scientists claim that sugar is even more addictive than cocaine, and I can relate to that. They say so based on their animal studies where rats choose sugar over cocaine. And the motivation for the rats to actually get to the sugar gets stronger if they have some wait time in between doses of sugar. So in other words, the absence makes the heart grow fonder. So the intermittent dose of sugar makes them want it even more. Just like when I learned from the goji berry incident is that's not a safe food that I can consume. That doesn't mean I won't ever eat something sweet again, but I'm not going to choose that food because I could tell I lost control with that food and that wasn't something I could regulate. So the worst part about that goji berry incident was all my favorite foods tasted terrible for the next couple of days. My tea tasted bitter and sour. All my foods, everything I ate, all my meals were kind of flat and blah, and just I knew that my taste buds had been violated and needed some time to readjust. But I had that self-awareness. Had I not, I might have thought, this all tastes kind of bad. I'm going to go for something a little more intense, maybe something really sweet, maybe something really salty to try to wake up my taste buds again. So it can definitely lead to a spiral. I was listening recently to Dr. Mark Hyman on the Doctor's Farmacy, and a podcast described a meeting where he met with a soda industry mogul, and the mogul was bragging about the scientific advances they were making in harvesting these human taste buds, growing them in petri dishes, and finding out what stimulates them. So these big industry leaders like Frito-Lay and Pepsi and these giant organizations, they have something called taste institutes, and they hire craving experts to find the bliss point of food. So they spend millions, if not more, in research money each year to find the exact combinations of salt, sugar, and fat that make your eyes roll back in your head and keep your hand reaching for more. There's not one thought to how this highly addictive food affects our health. This is all about money, folks. And just know that it's no accident that you feel drawn to these foods. And once you start, you can't stop. There's proof that the more sugar we eat, the less we taste it and the more we want. Not to mention that fact that hitting that bliss point on a regular basis creates this distaste of healthy foods because it sets up our palate in this weird way. So like me with the goji berries, everything tasted really flat and terrible after the goji berry incident. So the more sugar in our lives, the less appealing the good stuff. And therein you have this downward spiral that every packaged good manufacturer has scripted for you before you even took your first bite. So here are the key impacts of sugar consumption on the body. And we're going to discuss this today in some of these. We're not going to hit all of them, but there's also an important one that's not on here that see if you can guess. And you can put it in the chat if you can guess what else I might be talking about that's not here on the list. But the first up is insulin resistance. We learned last time about how eating too many simple carbs creates insulin resistance, the precursor to diabetes, something that plagues a huge percentage of our population. A quick review for those that weren't with us last time: insulin resistance occurs when our blood sugars are consistently elevated from eating sugars or simple carbs. And the insulin receptors on our healthy cells become numb to insulin, kind of like the boy who cried wolf too many times. And insulin is that molecule, that hormone that carries the sugar out of our blood and into our cells so that it can be used as energy or stored as fat. You'll also recall that cancer cells are loaded with insulin receptors. And in fact, cancer cells have 10 times the number of insulin receptors that normal cells have, and they gobble up glucose that's a rapid rate, much higher than healthy cells. Up to 50 times faster, which means our healthy cells are not getting the sugar inside to make the energy, so we feel tired, but the cancer cells are feasting on the sugar. So if you weren't with us last time, you might want to review and listen to that Carbs Part 1 to get all the details. But insulin resistance is a big part of inflammation in the body and a health concern for anyone, but especially someone with cancer. Stacy, are you seeing the Q&A on my screen or not?
I am.
Okay, see, I can't see my cursor when I'm in screen share to get that off, and I can't quite. Let me just take a pause to try to get that off so people can see the whole slide.
Yeah, so they're not seeing what you're seeing.
Great.
They're all good. Everybody
Okay,
can see what that's just on your screen.
Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. The most significant one that I want to share of impact of sugar on the body is sugar's impact on our immune system. So our immune systems are incredibly complex, and I'm going to give you the very brief thumbnail takeaway instead of the deep dive. But basically, when we eat sugar, our immune system is dulled or put to sleep for several hours after we eat it. And the effect is dose dependent, meaning the more sugar we eat, the more asleep our immune cells are for a longer period of time. So that's right. About 30 minutes to as long as 4 to 5 hours after we eat sugar, our immune system is kind of on pause. Think back to the average American consumer who's consuming about 150 or 180 pounds of sugar per year. That probably means they're having pretty regular doses of sugar throughout the day, which means a pretty consistently suppressed immune system. You can see then why our lifestyle set us up for this disaster with COVID. The worst thing we can be doing when we're sick is having fruit juice or sugary foods or fast foods, because that's only going to disarm our immune system from mounting a response. Now, the same is true for cancer, obviously. The immune system plays a huge role in cancer and eliminating cancer cells, but unlike a flu or the cold, a common cold, we're talking about a longer term commitment to our health, and it's going to be a marathon and not a sprint. So each day then becomes about renewing that commitment to inviting health, creating health, and leaving old habits behind that no longer serve us. So the next aspect of sugar we're going to explore is we're going to debunk the cholesterol myth of cardiovascular health. So sugar creates a lot of nasty compounds, but for the moment, we're going to focus on the free radicals or the reactive oxygen species that are created when we eat sugar. So these are these crazy rogue molecules that act like cars speeding down a highway with no brakes. They can damage any cells in their path because of their unstable atomic structure. So reactive oxygen species are one mechanism by which sugar leads to cardiovascular disease, because everyone mistakenly thinks it's cholesterol. That's the problem. And I'll explain the situation. So blaming cholesterol is kind of like blaming the person that rushes over to the victim of a crime and blames them for committing the crime. So cholesterol is an essential building block of life. And in fact, our bodies make up to 75% of the cholesterol measured in our blood, and only about 25% comes from our diet. So the more cholesterol we eat, the body backs off and makes less, and vice versa. So cholesterol is what comes to the rescue when our arteries suffer micro tears or this very microscopic damage. And it comes to act like a Band-Aid in the artery wall. Then other cells are attracted to this Band-Aid, like calcium and things like that. And that ends up stiffening the arteries and blocking the blood flow that you can see here on the last row of the picture. So that's a problem. But let's back up for a second. What causes those tears in our arteries, those micro injuries that then cause cholesterol to come repair it? The tears can be caused from such a variety of sources, from diet and lifestyle mainly. You can see here from, exhaust, auto exhaust, to stress, to medications, to lack of the right food, too much of the wrong food. But sugar is among the top, offenders of what damages our arteries, because what happens is our red blood cells are obviously flowing through our arteries on a constant basis. And the more coated with sugar they are, which is what happens, the more sugar that's in our bloodstream, it kind of sticks to our red blood cells. That's what they're measuring in our blood, that A1C. And the sugar molecule itself is sticky, and it's a little bit jagged of a molecule. So as it's flowing through, if there's a lot of it all the time, it's going to be creating these micro injuries to our vessels. And then that calls cholesterol over to repair it and act as a Band-Aid. So it's really a big part of the cardiovascular disease process. The third area of sugar's impact on the body that we're going to touch on is mood. Sugar, as I already mentioned, is really highly addictive, and it stimulates the pleasure centers in our brain to release opioids and dopamine. And when we eat sugar and these ultra-processed foods, our brains release this huge blast of these feel-good neurotransmitters. But guess what? Like everything else, what comes up must come down, just like the rise and fall of the blood sugar that goes with it. It can, when it comes down, it can leave us feeling so down in the dumps that we're compelled to go searching for that like next hit and perk ourselves back up. So oftentimes the next hit has to be bigger and better to evoke the same response in the brain. It sounds a lot like drug and alcohol use, and it's pretty scary stuff. So the ironic part is that chronic use of sugar actually ends up inhibiting the brain's production of these feel-good chemicals. So, similar to how our healthy cells become numb to the insulin if we become insulin resistant and it can't get out of the bloodstream into our cells. So it turns into a neurotransmitter roller coaster that can very much lead to feelings of anxiety and depression and real food addiction. So the last thing that anyone needs who is going through a cancer journey is wild sugar-induced mood swings on top of it. The emotions along a normal cancer journey are plenty to manage. We don't need sugar to be intensifying it. So what are we to do? How do we deal with it? It's the wild west of food out there with manufacturing, moguls out there targeting us in these hugely scientific ways and really strategically trying to get us addicted to these foods. So how do we manage this? And how do we get off this sugar roller coaster? So I'm going to give you some tools next. First thing to check in on is, am I actually hungry? How long has it been since I've eaten a meal or a snack with healthy protein and healthy fats? So eating enough adequate nutrient-dense foods on a regular schedule keeps that primal hunger that sends us running straight for cookies or chips away. So skipping meals or eating too little protein or too few healthy fats during our meals can result in us getting overly hungry. And especially if we don't have steady blood sugar to begin with, and we allow ourselves to get too hungry or hangry, as it's known. If you're hangry, that's definitely a sign of blood sugar roller coaster. So that survival mechanism kicks in when we get hangry, and the things we crave are those rapid sugar foods, sugar itself, or these ultra processed foods that turn quickly to sugar. So eating adequate, healthy protein and fat is so important, and these complex carbs, to keep the cravings at bay. And one thing to really remember is the feel-good chemical of, in our brain, serotonin, it can only be made from protein. So you've got to have those good base raw materials. If you get a craving, the second thing to check in on is drinking a glass of water or having a cup of tea. A cup of green tea would be ideal, especially in the cancer journey. And just have your glass of water, have your tea, let your body settle, wait 10 to 15 minutes. And if you still find you're having the craving and you're going to choose to eat the food, at least choose some healthy fat and or protein to go alongside of it or eat before it, to give your brain those signals of fullness, the kind I wasn't getting from the goji berries, right? I could have endlessly eaten those things. So eating some macadamia nuts, some walnuts, some dried unsweetened coconut chips, something else to give your body something to hold you back from overeating and to also slow the release of the sugars in your bloodstream. Another thing to point out with keeping off the sugar roller coaster is, don't buy those trigger foods for yourself. Like it would be silly of me and self-sabotage to keep buying those dark chocolate covered goji berries and have them around just tempting me to overeat. So I know I can't eat that food safely. I won't buy it anymore. Important for you to also know yourself. If you know you reach for sweets either daily or weekly or on a regular basis, that you need to know that you have to have a safety plan. Like, these are some safe chocolates. They are not going to spike blood sugars. They're good quality. They're sweetened with not artificial sweeteners, but safe sugar alternatives, which are monk fruit and stevia, things like that. And they're safe options when you're having that craving, as opposed to trying to deny that craving is ever going to come up for you. We have to know ourselves. So you can make yourself things like chocolate avocado mousse that's delicious and sweeten it with monk fruit or stevia, some chia pudding, some paleo energy bars. You need to check in when you're having these cravings about what you're feeling, because it's really important to do this and really check in on the emotional aspect of what's going on. Are you craving sweet because you're missing sweet in your relationships? Are you feeling disconnected from people and looking for comfort? So if you're looking for things, emotional things from food, that's something to kind of check in on and be aware of. Journaling is a great way to do that. And there's a couple books that are great on this topic. One is called The Body Keeps Score. The other is called Nourishing Wisdom. And that really speaks to those emotional eating issues, if you any of that is interested to you. Stress is another huge one. Managing stress is a huge part of managing our eating choices. We're under an extraordinary amount of stress as a general society today. And then if you put a cancer diagnosis on top of that, which is probably one of the most stressful things a person can go through, you're talking about a really high level of stress. And you have to figure out a way to have self-awareness of that, to manage it in order to make good choices with your food. Doing yoga, meditation, prayer, journaling, all those things, we all know what calms us best and need to kind of use that and practice it in order to be grounded and making good food choices. Guess what? That music activates the same feel-good parts of our brain that eating craveable foods does. So when you're having a craving, an option is get the music going and dance and sing and listen to some good music and see if you can get those brain chemicals released from the joy of the music instead of the joy of the sugar. Exercise releases some of those good brain chemicals and endorphins as well without relying on sugar. And it also happens to blunt the appetite for those empty calories. So it's a great way to also manage cravings and food. Sunshine, so important to get daily sunshine every day to regulate our mood and help us get good sleep. Early morning light is important. Getting out in nature every day and making sure our circadian rhythms are good, our sleep is good, so that, because being overly stressed and overly tired is a deadly combination for making really bad food choices, right? So I'm going to move lastly to the things that I would recommend you do use as sweeteners. Now, this is not to make these a mainstay of your diet. This should be used sparingly if as needed, but nothing this is not a healthy, health promoting food. This is just a safe sugar alternative. So monk fruit is one of them. It is very much sweeter than regular sugar, 100 to 250 times sweeter. Use it sparingly. If you jack up your taste buds on monk fruit, you're going to distort your palate for eating the good stuff. So make sure that you're using it sparingly and appropriately. Monk fruit most of the time has erythritol added to it for bulk. So meaning like if you're baking this monk fruit substitute, it would be equal in your recipes. If erythritol bothers your GI system, which it can cause some minor bloating or gas, then you can also find pure monk fruit, which does not have the additive. And stevia, the stevia plant is a green leafy plant that like resembles, basil or, an herb, and also much, much sweeter than regular sugar. So needs to be used sparingly. It's 100 to 300 times as sweet as sugar. So again, beware of your palate and your taste buds. When you're looking for a stevia, I'd like you to choose something like what's on the screen, that Organic Tradition stevia leaf powder. You want something that resembles the plant that it came from. You don't want it to look like white crystal sugar or a white clear liquid that has nothing to do with this beautiful stevia plant. So the closer it resembles the plant, dried stevia leaves are available. This is basically a pulverized, dried leaf. And that's the kind of product you're really looking to use. And again, use sparingly. If you're interested in reading more about sugar and our food, our industrial food production, and really what's behind some of our foods that we're eating, it's fascinating stuff. Here are some great books. The podcast, Dr. Mark Hyman goes into tremendous detail because these are over an hour each episode. He can talk much longer and much more in depth about the sugar, the effects on the body, and how to really, check in on that. So those are great resources. And I thought this quote was perfect and fitting for today, where there seems to be such a separation from our health world and our food world and how they really just don't overlap. It's, sad but true. And very last, this is the only sugar that is your friend. She is my little furry sugar, and she's the only sugar that is a real friend to anyone. So we are finished. We made it through, and now I'm excited to get questions.
Oh my goodness. I feel like I always go, whew, when the content's over. That was so good. And I'm going to be your partner in crime and tell you, don't feel bad about the goji berries. At least you got the goji berry in there. I'm entering into Lenten and the Easter season, and I'll go first. Powerless over the thing like the jelly beans. And I tease, but I know how challenging this subject is for our listeners. But it also brings to light that the two of us are human as well. And we're all on this journey of not having to be perfect, but still trying to do better. And particularly for our folks that are on the cancering journey, it really is important. This is a big topic. Sugar is, like you said, just everywhere, Paula. We did get as you and I were chatting ahead of time, we were wondering what the questions were that might come in. And Mary Greason was so kind. She went first, and she actually had a couple questions that will clump together. So as you guys start to think about some of these questions, remember, Paula and I will make sure that you have the summary, including that last slide, Paula, which I think was so important if they want to read into it more. But here are the questions for Mary. Ready? Are all artificial sweeteners bad? Did we not say? We both guessed that question. So great question, Mary. Let me give them to you all at once because they're sort of related. Are all artificial sweeteners bad? What about honeys? Are they better? And she also asked, I'm so sorry. The third part of that was, there wasn't a third part. So just those two. So okay. Artificial sweeteners bad, and are honeys better?
Yes, great questions. Great questions. And I could do a whole talk on just artificial sweeteners. And if you guys are interested in that, so, give us the feedback. Is that something you want me to explore deeper and in depth? The short answer is yes. All artificial sweeteners are off the table for health purposes. They are not healthy foods. They are toxic, and we want to stay away from all artificial sweeteners. The two that I put up are pretty much the only sugars alternatives I would safely use on the cancering journey. Honey is obviously a natural, healthy source of sugar. However, if you have cancer, your cancer does not care if it's coming from honey or a Big Mac or a big gulp or a jelly bean or a goji berry. It's going to use that sugar for its fuel and to grow and prosper in your body. So we have to be aware of that sugar is sugar when we're having a cancering journey, and that we have to really be aware of that. So I would refrain from using honey, especially on any kind of regular basis. That would be a rare occasion kind of use for me if I were on the cancering journey, and I would safely try to steer clear of anything that's going to create a glycemic response, because the cancer cells will use that to their advantage.
What about maple syrup?
Same. It's a healthy source of sugars in moderation for someone who's not trying to heal from cancer. So again, depends, because I'm talking to a group that I don't know your individual stories. Like for my children, if I'm making something, I would sweeten it with a little bit of maple syrup for them. That's perfectly fine to do in moderation, but it's still going to be used, to the advantage of the cancer right now.
Right. And Susie asks, what are your thoughts on natural sugars? We circled back on that. We had a little bit of a topic or conversation about this on a prior session, but what are your thoughts on natural sugars? Should you eat a lot of fruit?
So I think, again, fruit in moderation has to be part of the cancer, picture. And again, it's going to vary, everyone is different, everyone's unique, and everyone's circumstances, whether you're pre-surgery, post-surgery, going through chemo, done with chemo or radiation, all of those scenarios are a little bit different. But in general, as a guideline, I would say, limiting fruit would be wise. 1 to 2 pieces a day is servings is plenty. The trick here is we can eat only vegetables and get all of the nutrients we need out of vegetables. The same is not true of fruit. So while fruit is healthy, it's a healthy food and has lots of great qualities, lots of great nutrients. Because of the sugar content, we want to limit that. And, it's best to focus on the veggies. So that would be my suggestion.
So, are there any breakfast cereals that you can recommend that are good?
Sadly, the short answer is no.
Yeah.
They're really highly processed. Cereal's not going to be your best, eating opportunity for breakfast. You want to go with real foods, stick with savory if you can. That savory is best, not to ignite those sort of sweet taste buds first thing in the morning and get that carb rush kind of going. It's kind of sets up the day for that. I find, at least for me personally, eating savory is best. So trying to, figure a way to make your breakfast work for you that is based on like whole foods. I saw an example of, say, a cauliflower instead of an oatmeal kind of porridge thing, a riced cauliflower with, berries and nuts and seeds. Yes, you can sweeten with a little bit of monk fruit, like, add a little bit if that's what you're, is missing for you in an experience of the food kind of way. But that way you're getting all these nutrients and all these real phytochemicals and things that are, your cells so desperately want to use in their army defense against the cancer. So I would steer clear of breakfast cereal.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I like to chat about, because this all, it's almost like a little bit upsetting, sugar is like one of those things that, if you love it and you like it, and people are always trying to figure out ways around the conversation. But what I like to remind us all is that the body doesn't naturally crave sugar all on its own. And so for our listeners, it's really important to remember, if you reframe this as, instead of I'm quitting sugar, I look at it a little differently. I look at the opportunity to load my plate up on what are the things that push my health forward instead of pulling from my health. So you're not saying you're necessarily quitting, you can never have that thing again or whatnot, but what you are trying to do is choose the foods that are pushing forward your healing that happens so wonderfully in the body. And so we're trying to set our body up for success, right? And so if somebody is coming off sugar, that's very unpleasant. Just for our listeners who don't know that, if you're trying to detox from sugar, it feels a bit like a little flu-y, if you will, like a little flu-like. But once you make that transition over to the other side of eating less sugar, almost no sugar, no added sugars and whatnot, the palate and the taste buds adjust very quickly. And all of a sudden you have these wonderful flavors that you're able to taste again in vegetables. And I said this before with my family, and they're like, oh my gosh, you got the same enjoyment from vegetables. And the answer is yes, with herb seasoning properly with, good fats and good herbs and seasonings like that, you can change the palate. So don't forget that on the other side of the addiction to sugar is you will not crave it the way that when you are engaged in lots of sugar eating, that you want. When you eat more, you want more. And what Paula was trying to say with the monk fruit and the stevia is the brain does not know whether or not you're having a healthier sugar choice or not. It just knows that something sweet's going in. And what happens when you eat sweet? You want more sweet. So you're making an intellectual decision, but the brain is still saying, I want whatever you got. Give it to me, right? Next question. Patty would like to know, well, what would you recommend, Paula, if for a healthy breakfast, if we're not doing the cereals and we're trying to stay away from a lot of fruit, what's your go-to breakfast?
Well, again, I have, a lot of ideas about that, but for me, it's really hard to answer that in a vacuum, because if I knew one-on-one, I would have some recommendations that'd be great and more specific to you. But because I don't know you and can't know each of you that way, in general, like you have to know yourself, like, are you a savory person that can do eggs in a variety of ways with, eggs and veggies are sort of a big go-to for me. So having a couple of eggs, any which style, you can make them scrambled and all the things, but the majority of your meal is going to be a healthy serving of veggies, dark leafy greens, shallots and carrots and, you name it, zucchini, anything you can kind of put in from your pantry in there in a saute pan with some extra virgin olive oil, that's going to give you that sustaining, long, fulfilling feeling and energy and really propel the health forward. So I love eggs and all of that. You can Google paleo breakfast ideas. They have a lot of great, you'll come up with so many good recipes. If that feels too savory and you want something sweeter, again, a chia seed pudding, you can sweeten it lightly with a little monk fruit or stevia, but your milk, your non-dairy milk, probably preferably. You can use coconut milk. You can use a non-dairy milk of your choosing. Make sure it doesn't have sweeteners in it because you want to be in control of the sweet, and you don't want it to have any carrageenan in it either. So you can use chia seed pudding. You can use non-dairy yogurt. Some people like that, but you're using it as a vehicle for, again, the good stuff, which is like nuts and seeds and, a serving of, darkly colored berries or dark cherries or something, rich like that, or pomegranates. You want to get a lot of bang for your buck, the best you can out of that eating opportunity. And so, for me, I eat a lot of leftovers for breakfast. That's my go-to. Like my meals don't necessarily look like what TV tells us our meals should look like. So it really depends on the person, but Googling paleo recipes might be a good help for you to kind of find that balance for yourself of where your palate lies within that framework of eating real whole foods.
And going back to what you said, because again, I always try to look at it through the lens of somebody who's just getting started. And I feel like we should encourage, and I know that's what we're doing, is to don't try to overhaul this whole thing overnight. Maybe what you take away from Paula, our discussion today is that I'm going to make a concerted effort of my 5 to 9 recommended servings of fruits and vegetables. I'm going to make the majority of them vegetables. I am going to take Paula's advice and make sure that I add a healthy fat like an avocado or an olive oil. I'm going to switch over, if I am able to tolerate eggs, I'm going to make a really good free range, choice on my eggs and make sure that I get a really good sourcing of that. And just slowly start to replace some of these things. We have a couple more questions, Paula, and I knew that this was going to be a hot topic. And as much as I hate the topic, I love it too. You know what I mean? All of us, yeah. I think, it really resonates with everybody, and to a certain degree. Ginny asks, fruits and veggies, if we cannot get the organic stuff, are there benefits from the conventional ones? And does that outweigh the pesticide problem, or is it safer just not to eat them at all? That's a toughie.
That is it's a great question, and one that's really interesting to think about. I don't know that I or anyone else really has the answer to that, because I don't know that specific question's ever been really tested in a lab before. So to give you an actual scientific answer, I don't really have one. But my instincts tell me that Mother Nature takes care of us, right? Even with man doing, not necessarily healthy things in cultivating those vegetables or plants. I like to think that Mother Nature ultimately comes through for us. And so my choice would be to wash them really well. Yep. Use a veggie wash of some sort, really, carefully wash things and do the best you can with what you have. I would not stay away from vegetables because you can't buy organic. That would not be my instinct at all. So do the best you can and sit down and bless it and ask God to make it the perfect food for you. Because I think there's great power in that, and not focusing on at all absolutely when you're sitting down to eat it. Don't be thinking about, oh gosh, there's pesticides on here or what have you. Once you've made that commitment and you're making yourself that lovely broccoli or whatever, bless it and ask God give you everything good from that. And don't think anything negative about that food once you're choosing to eat it,
I agree. And consuming in gratitude. I 100% agree. And nature, Mother Nature, she provides for us. And we do the best we can with what we've been given, right? I think I can answer the next one. I've developed a food aversion to most vegetables, especially cauliflower, broccoli, and Brussels sprouts. How can I get in healthy veggies? Well, those are not the only ones. So I'm assuming there is on the big spectrum of options, there's got to be other choices that, maybe you can tolerate for the time being. But I've also come across, and Paula, I'd be curious to know, I really like Dr. Cowan's garden, some of the vegetable, dried vegetable powders that are not, there's nothing else in them. And so if you could take a look in there, I know this is a good one. Dr. Nasha Winters is actually the one that turned me onto them. And when my brother was on the cancering journey, he was struggling with a lot of those, and I butcher this word, help me, cruciferous vegetables, the broccoli and the cauliflower. What we would do is prepare really good eggs and use this vegetable powder, Dr. Cowan's garden, that she recommended. And it's actually pretty good, and it was pretty concentrated. So take a look at that one. And I would say explore some of your other choices. It's funny, I can appreciate the comment because our taste buds change, but remember, there are tricks that we probably don't have time to get into today to change that palate, switching it up a little bit. And lastly, we'll do one more. Jenny said, I'll pray harder and more before I eat from now on, as we all should, Jenny,
Yes.
right? As we all should. We should pause. There's something magical between that inhalation and the exhalation. And when we offer our food gratitude, as woo-woo as that sounds, I completely 100% support what Paula just said. True, true, true. The last question we have time to answer is, I also cannot have eggs since I have ovarian cancer. What can I have in place of eggs for breakfast? Is oatmeal okay? And I know that we talked about that before, but can you just answer it one more time for us?
Yeah, grains are a tricky, slippery slope, and they're different for different people. There's different schools of thought. Some people have school of thought that grains are glycemic and they can be inflammatory, and without knowing your system and the process of going through cancer treatment can also upset your GI system in a way where you're setting yourself up for more inflammation by eating things that are potentially inflammatory, like grains for people. And again, we can't see inside of ourselves. We don't have a magic, vision. So grains, for a lot of people, they stay away from them. So if you're going to choose oatmeal and it feels like a good choice for you, I would urge you to get organic steel cut oats. That should be pretty affordable, again, because we're talking about, or oats in general are not a high priced item. So organic steel cut oats is the best version of oatmeal. You want it to take a long time to cook because that means it takes a long time to digest. So the sugars are released slowly. The bottom line with grains is they are still going to have, they're still made of starches. And it's another reason, again, depending on where you are in your journey, that might not be appropriate for you, but maybe that cauliflower, that rice cauliflower bowl is a good way to replace the oatmeal in your life, and really dressing it up in a way that feels sweet to you, like an oatmeal. You can put full fat coconut milk with it. You can put berries with it and some nuts and seeds and a little sprinkle of monk fruit or stevia. And you might forget you're not even eating oatmeal and you might enjoy that cauliflower.
Yeah, that's a great one. I've got one last recommendation for Wendy. And just let me get it out because I know that the topic of juice is, sends everybody over the back of their chair. I just want to remind us, Paula said, when we're not feeling well, one of the worst things that we can do is reach for what I'm sure many of us grew up on, which is that glass of orange juice. I just want to share with you this information. An 8-ounce glass of orange juice, Paula, is 24 grams of sugar. That's the equivalent of 6 teaspoons of sugar. Now, that's the same as like that cookie, right? Some of those cookies, right? So again, remember, the brain doesn't discriminate. And even though the orange juice, it was a good thing, it's better to probably eat the orange. So what I have found is a great hack is I use a subscription company called Farmer's Juice. And Farmer's Juice, I only purchase their vegetable cold pressed juice. Why? A couple of reasons. That is, I'm not going to lie. You definitely have to develop the palate for it, right? Because it does taste a bit grassy, I'll say, but I kind of feel like it's a little bit of my insurance policy. And I know that the fruit, I mean, the vegetables are organic. And so I kind of feel like if I'm getting stuck on that, I can't buy it. Whole foods are always going to be better. But if I'm in one of those scenarios where I'm traveling, these juices, you know, are straight vegetable. It's a green juice, and it gives you, Wendy, just another option. Do I recommend doing that all the time? As Paula mentioned, the whole unprocessed, get the fiber in there and all the things. But if I'm trying to make sure that I get all the green ones in, that's a great hack for me. So you may want to investigate. It's called Farmer's Juice, and they're a newer company. And once again, I got the recommendation from folks that I very much respect, like Paula in the industry, where I know that there's like a whole paleo section. Of course, they do a fruit combination, but that's not the one I'm talking about. I'm talking about their keto juices that are straight green vegetables. So if while you're not tolerating it, maybe you could drink it if you like grass flavor.
I want to answer circle back to Wendy's question about not being able to eat eggs in the breakfast thing real quick again. Another option, Wendy, would be to make a smoothie with, the right balance of things, which we can get into on another day, because that's a kind of a deep dive topic of the right combination. Obviously, minimal fruit, and you need to have a healthy fat and a healthy protein in there. And so doing a smoothie and or having a nice giant breakfast salad, especially warmer weather's coming, that might be more appealing to you as the warmer months come than it is in the winter. In the winter, I wouldn't want a salad to start the day. I'd more want to sit with a bowl of soup. That's another good option. So there are lots of things, but we have to kind of reframe what breakfast is all about. So
Great.
I don't know if that's helpful.
All right, Miss Paula, we gotta wrap it up. We did get one last question from Wendy, and we'll answer it offline. But we have a question for our listeners before we head out. Paula and I are closing in on our March topic, and we've come up with 3. And so we thought, who best to ask where we should go next, but you all, because you're so kind to sit with us, every couple of weeks. So here's our 3, putting it out to you, and I just want you to put in the chat really quick, which would be your preference next? So here's the topic. Paula can speak on alcohol. Paula can speak on fats. And then the third topic, Paula would like to speak on top cancer fighting foods. I feel like I know which way it's going to go, but let's see what they come in. We have 27 people on the call today. We've got one fat. So we've got 30 seconds. Throw it in there.
Yeah, get it in there.
I'm doing my little
tally.
Yep. So we got 2. Woo!
And it's not to say we won't get to all those topics eventually.
Yep.
We're just wondering like what is on your top of your mind, top of your list to listen and hear about. There's so much to say about all of those foods, and even, we could do multiple episodes on some of those. And the fat topic, especially the fat topic, is a big one, and healthy fats versus the ones to stay away from. That probably is, a 2-session, topic. It
looks like top cancer foods has won, with both of the other ones highly represented. So I think we're on the right track where our listeners would like to hear from us. Yep. Listen, ladies, and if there are any gentlemen sitting on the call, Paula and I want to say thank you as always. They've all been my favorite. I'm not gonna lie. I was gonna say this one's been my favorite, but they've all been my favorite. We really appreciate you. And please know that there will be a follow-up email sent. I will answer that last question let me go all the way back, from Wendy. I will get to that juicing question for you offline. And please feel free to reach out. Stacy@believebig.org. We'll catch you next time. Please note, we have a change of date. Paula, just correct me. Next session is March the 16th. So you're off for a couple of weeks, but we'll see you back on March 16th for top cancer fighting foods. Have a great day.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.